They told my 8-year-old that her favorite dress made her look poor, so they threw it in the garbage. The moment my daughter asked, "Mom, do I look bad?" was the moment something inside me broke. It was no longer about clothes or insults. It was about her worth. I didn't shed a single tear, but 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at their door and the color drained from their faces. The sound of shattering porcelain is what I heard first. Not a crash, but a delicate, terrible tinkling, like a chime made of ice. I was in the dining room, placing the final fork beside a plate that cost more than my first car, when my daughter, Chloe, exploded through the doorway. Her small chest was heaving, her eyes wide with a panic I hadn't seen since she was a toddler afraid of the dark. "Mom," the word was a broken whisper. "They're gone." I turned, the polished silver cool in my hand. "What's gone, sweetheart?" "All of them." A sob caught in her throat. My blue sundress, the t-shirt with the cartoon cat, my comfy leggings with the stars, everything. It's all just empty. The air in the room didn't just grow still, it congealed. It was the heavy, knowing silence of a secret everyone is in on except for you. My in-laws, Arthur and Beatrice, glanced up from their salads with the serene, self-satisfied expressions as philanthropists at a charity gala. And beside them, my niece, Isabella, swung her legs, the light catching the crystal bees on her $100 shoes. I set the fork down, the click echoing in the quiet. I walked to Chloe and knelt, the hard marble floor pressing into my knees. "What do you mean, empty?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "They said they were helping me clean," she whispered, her lower lip trembling uncontrollably. "But they took all the things I love. They're just gone." From behind her, Beatrice released a sigh that was a masterpiece of performative sympathy. "Oh, my darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with false honey. "You should be thanking us." My stomach plunged, a stone down a deep well. "We simply did a little curating," she continued, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Some of those items you clung to were simply not suitable for a child in our circle." Our circle. The phrase hung in the air, toxic and familiar, the sentence she had been waiting a decade to voice. Chloe wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Where is my blue dress?" Arthur waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting a gnat. "That old rag? It made you look like you were from some discount village." Chloe flinched, as if the words were physical slaps. And then Isabella, perfect, pristine Isabella in her silk smock, let out a peal of laughter. "Finally," she chirped, "someone took out the trash. She always dressed like a charity case." My daughter didn't crumple. She folded. Her shoulders curled in, her head bowed, as if she were trying to compress herself into nothingness, to disappear from their judgmental gaze. I didn't move. Not a muscle. The storm inside me was freezing over, turning into something hard and sharp and deliberate. I placed a hand on her back, a solid, calm anchor. "Come on, baby," I told her, my voice soft but firm. "Let's go." I stood, took her small, trembling hand in mine, and walked us out of that room. I didn't look at the people who shared my last name, not when they muttered their hollow apologies, not when Arthur called out, "Where is this drama coming from?" Not when Isabella giggled a final, "Bye, weirdo." Back in her small, tucked-away bedroom, Chloe wept into my shoulder, her tiny body shaking. "Maybe they're right, Mommy," she hiccuped, her voice muffled by my shirt. "Maybe my clothes were ugly. Maybe I don't belong here with them." A cold, steel resolve solidified in my chest. "No," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "You are perfect, and you belong with me, wherever that is." I brushed the hair from her damp forehead. Do you want to stay in this house, or do you want us to leave?
She didn't even blink. Leave. So we did. We packed with a swift, quiet efficiency, the clothes they had deemed unworthy to steal, the stuffed animals they had overlooked, the few treasures that mattered to her. Her father, my husband Leo, was away on a business trip. It was just us, two fugitives from a war they didn't know they'd started. We walked down the grand, echoing hallway, past the oil portraits and the imported rugs, past the people who had spent years making us feel like temporary guests. Beatrice was waiting in the grand foyer, her lips curved into a smile that didn't touch her cold eyes. "And where will you go, dear?" she asked, her tones syrupy with faux concern. "You can't possibly afford this little performance." Arthur chuckled from the staircase. "You have nothing without this family, Amelia." Isabella, peeking from behind her grandmother, stuck out her tongue. "Bye, dumpster princess." I didn't answer. I didn't grant them a single syllable. I opened the heavy oak door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and let it slam shut behind us. The sound was a full stop. The air outside tasted like liberation. They were so sure they knew me. The girl from the wrong side of the tracks who married their prince. They thought I was powerless, that my strength was a facade over desperation. They had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks later, a certified letter was delivered to their estate, and the world they had built on a foundation of snobbery and debt began to crumble. People often ask how I, Amelia, a girl who knew the weight of $1 down to the last penny, ended up living under the roof of people like Arthur and Beatrice. The answer is a slow erosion, one compromised dream at a time. I wasn't from a tragic background, just a financially strained one. My mother was a nurse, my father a warehouse supervisor. Our lives were a constant, careful math equation, where wants were always subtracted from needs. I learned early that if I wanted something, not luxuries, but things like new school books or a winter coat that wasn't a hand-me-down, I had to be the one to earn it. So I studied as if scholarship offers were lifelines. I worked evenings bagging groceries, weekends cleaning offices, every shift I could grab. I ran on ambition, instant noodles, and a stubborn refusal to accept the limits they tried to place on me. Through a combination of grit, grace, and student loans that gave me nightmares, I made it to a decent university. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was a door, and I kicked it open. Graduation left me exhilarated, exhausted, and buried under a mountain of debt. Adulthood felt like a race I'd started with ankle weights. My first real job was at their company, Winslow and Sons, a family empire that gleamed with old money polish, though I would later learn the gilding was flaking off at the edges. And my future husband, Leo, was my manager. He was quiet, thoughtful, and carried the burden of his name with a gentle awkwardness I found endearing. I was driven, sharp, and tired of my bank account hovering near zero. We were an unlikely equation, and the whispers started almost immediately. The first time his mother, Beatrice, heard of me, she reportedly scoffed, "You don't marry the intern, it's tacky." I was a junior analyst, but facts were irrelevant to her narrative. When Leo and I began dating, the atmosphere at work became so frosty you could have stored meat in it. I was strategically relocated to a different division, not fired, but neatly sidelined like a book that didn't match the decor. We got married anyway, and that's when I made the single most foolish decision of my life. I agreed to move into their palatial home. My reasons seemed sound at the time. We would save for our own place, build bridges with his family, become a real unit. I was hopelessly optimistic. From the day I carried my single, worn suitcase over their threshold, I ceased being a person. I was a problem they had to manage, a living, breathing reminder that their bloodline had been, in their eyes, contaminated. They critiqued everything. My wardrobe was thrift store chic. The way I seasoned food was unrefined. My family was quaint. Every day was a fresh lesson in my own inadequacy. When Chloe was born, the dynamic worsened. She was the spare heir from her first breath, because Isabella, my sister-in-law Diana's daughter, was the anointed one. Isabella had a wardrobe curated by designers and a bedroom that looked like a Versailles exhibit. Chloe was given a converted sewing room that smelled faintly of dust and mothballs. Isabella's birthdays were society events. Chloe's were quiet, controlled affairs, with sugar-free cupcakes Beatrice insisted on. The disparity was a constant, aching hum.
And through it all, I worked. Not for them. My presence in the company was now deemed awkward, but on my own venture. A small online boutique I had nurtured through late nights and early mornings. They called it my little project. Beatrice once patted my shoulder and said, "It's so adorable that you have a pet business." That pet business began to generate real revenue. Not private jet money, but reliable, sustainable profit. The kind of money that comes from building something from the ground up. One sale, one satisfied customer at a time. For the first time in my life, I had financial independence that had nothing to do with their approval or their coffers. That autonomy was a quiet superpower. Meanwhile, the proud Winslow & Sons empire was quietly rotting from the inside. They were oblivious, of course, wafting through life on the assumption that their legacy was a perpetual motion machine. When the company's CFO started calling Leo with minor hiccups, temporary liquidity shortfalls, delayed receivables, my husband, in a panic, asked me to help. Just once. A one-time favor became a monthly rescue mission. A pattern became a dependency. Without my quiet financial interventions, their ship would have already been on the ocean floor. I wasn't a savior. I was a life support system. And still, they looked down on me, treating me as if I were one misstep away from financial ruin. When I drove away from that mansion with Chloe in the backseat, she kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting a pursuit that never came. People like the Winslows don't chase you. They expect you to return, chastened and begging for forgiveness. I took us to a place we had never been, a boutique hotel in the city with a rooftop pool and staff who remembered your name. Chloe stared at the vaulted ceilings and the modern art as if she had landed on Mars. "Are we allowed to be here?" she whispered. The question was a knife to my heart. They had so thoroughly convinced her she was unworthy of nice things. "Yes, baby," I said, my voice thick. "We absolutely belong here." We spent the afternoon wrapped in plush robes, ordering overpriced strawberry milkshakes and French fries. Chloe kept pinching her own arm. "Is this a dream?" she'd ask. I let her have the fantasy. Reality, with all its complications, could wait. Leo didn't arrive until late. He walked into the hotel room looking harried and confused. "Amelia," he said, dropping his briefcase, "what's going on? My phone has been blowing up with vague texts from my mother." I looked at him, this good man who was often willfully blind to his family's cruelty. "What's going on?" I said, my voice dangerously calm, "is that your parents threw our daughter's entire wardrobe in the dumpster because they decided it made her look poor." He blinked. "Why would they do that?" "Because," I said, the word tasting like ash, "they believe we are poor, and that poverty is a contagious disease." He sank onto the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. "Amelia, you know how they are. They're traditional. They don't always think."
They emotionally terrorized an 8-year-old over a sundress, Leo. They're not traditional, they are cruel. He winced. I'm not defending them. I need to manage this. I can't live there anymore, I stated. It wasn't a request. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Okay, if you want to move, we'll find a place. I don't want a full-blown family war. A war? I almost smiled. Leo, we've been living on a battlefield for years. You just refused to put on a helmet. We ate a quiet room service dinner. Chloe, exhausted from the emotional turmoil, fell asleep buried in pillows, a look of peace on her face for the first time in weeks. When we were alone, I opened my laptop. The time for secrets was over. I'm done. I'm done propping up your parents' company. His head snapped up. What are you talking about? I turned the screen toward him. They're insolvent, Leo. They have been for over a year. Your CFO hasn't been asking for help. He's been begging for a bailout. And every time he called you, you came to me, and I provided. He looked like he'd been gut punched. I didn't realize it was that dire. I didn't because they never tell you the truth. But this, I said, pointing to a spreadsheet of interwoven loans and cash flow projections, is the unvarnished truth. Without the lines of credit I've been extending and the personal loans I've been covering, they won't make payroll in 30 days.
He stared, silent and pale. My parents, he began weakly. Your parents, I cut in, my voice sharp, treated me like an interloper. They treated our daughter like a stain on their name. That is who I have been financially supporting. That is who I have been keeping afloat with the money from my adorable little project. He scrubbed his face with his hands. Let's sleep on it. Don't make a permanent decision tonight. I didn't reply. He wasn't ready to hear the verdict. We put Chloe to bed. We turned off the lights. We sat in the dim glow of the city skyline, a chasm of unspoken words between us. The silence was a physical weight. Then his phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. Once, twice, then in a relentless, angry stream. He flipped it over, pushed it away, but the vibrations were an insistent alarm. After 20 minutes of this, he stood up abruptly, snatched the phone, and walked out onto the balcony, sliding the door shut behind him. I watched him through the glass. He put the phone to his ear, listening to a voice message. His shoulders, initially slumped in defeat, slowly stiffened. His jaw tightened. He listened to another, his free hand clenching into a fist. At one point, he pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, as if trying to physically stop the words from entering his brain. It felt like an eternity. When he came back inside, he was a different man. The conflict was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, clear fury. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, breathing deeply. "Do it," he said, his voice low and gravelly. My heart stuttered. "Do what?" "Pull the plug," he said. "All of it." I was stunned. I had expected resistance, negotiation, not this sudden, decisive fury. "Leo, what did you hear?" He turned his phone around. It was a long voice message from the family group chat, a message they had never intended for me to hear. It was Beatrice, Arthur, Diana, and Isabella's laughter in the background. They were talking about me, about how I had entrapped Leo, how I was lucky to be allowed to polish the family's silver, how I was a leech using his money from my ridiculous little shop, how Chloe was sullen and lacked breeding, how they had graciously allowed us to inhabit their space. And then the final, searing sentence from Beatrice. "She'll be back. They have nothing without us. She is nothing without us." Something in Leo had finally, irreparably snapped. He handed me the phone as if it were radioactive. "No more," he said, his voice terrifyingly steady.
So we sat down at the desk, side by side. We opened bank accounts, email threads, and loan documents. One by one, we closed the taps. We canceled the credit extensions. We called the banks and refused to co-sign any new loans. We withdrew every single invisible safety net that they had come to see as their birthright. We didn't scream or threaten. We just stopped. The quiet finality of our keystrokes was louder than any scream. Leo leaned back in his chair, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. "I should have done this years ago," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'm placing my hand over his. You're doing it now." He nodded, his eyes dark with resolve. "They're going to lose their minds." A small, cold smile touched my lips. "I'm counting on it." But we had no idea how fast the collapse would come, or how vicious they would become when cornered. All we knew was that we had pulled the pin on the grenade. Now we just had to wait for the explosion. The silence that followed was the most unnerving part. For months, there was nothing. No calls from Beatrice demanding an apology, no texts from Arthur about family loyalty, just a void. And from people like them, silence is never peaceful. It's a predator lying in wait. Just as I started to believe they might have licked their wounds and moved on, Leo got the call. It wasn't from his parents. It was from Mr. Albright, the family's long-serving lawyer and chief enabler. His name on the caller ID was a fire alarm. He put him on speaker. "Leo, Amelia," his voice boomed, overly formal. "We need to speak, in person." "Regarding what?" I met Leo's eyes across the kitchen island. "I told you," he mouthed. "Regarding what?"
A long, weary sigh traveled through the speaker. "It's regarding your parents' affairs. I'd prefer to discuss it face to face. May I come to your home?" At home, with a lawyer. That meant it was catastrophic. Chloe was at the table, carefully drawing a picture of our new apartment building. "Can you give us a hint, Mr. Albright?" Leo pressed. Another pause. "It's the company," Mr. Albright said, his voice dropping. "You should hear this from me, not from the rumor mill." When he arrived, he looked like he'd aged 5 years. He sat at our kitchen table, refusing coffee, and cut straight to the chase. "They're going to lose it," he said, not meeting our eyes. "Winslow and Sons. The debts, the outstanding liabilities. The CFO has been performing miracles, but without the consistent financial support," he trailed off, glancing nervously at me, "the support you were providing, they can no longer meet their operational obligations." What?" Chloe asked, looking up from her drawing. "Bills, honey," I said gently. "They can't pay their bills, or their employees. Within the next month, they will have no choice but to file for bankruptcy, and due to the way the corporate and personal assets are intertwined, it is highly likely they will lose everything. The house, the vacation properties, everything." He looked at Leo. "I don't believe your parents fully comprehend personal ramifications." Of course they didn't. They lived in a world where consequences were for other people. "I'm here," Mr. Albright said, straightening his tie, "as acting as an intermediary." Of course they did. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice flat. "To re-establish your previous financial arrangement," he said, almost wincing as he said it. So the silence hadn't been pride. It had been the quiet before the groveling. They just couldn't do it themselves. Leo crossed his arms. "They treated my wife and child like dirt. Why on earth would we help them now?" Mr. Albright closed his eyes briefly. "This is a legacy, Leo, your great-grandfather's life's work. Your parents feel it would be a tragedy to see it end." "Then they should have run it better," I said. His eyes flicked to me, surprised by my bluntness, then resigned. "I understand your position, Amelia, truly, but I'm asking you to consider them as your family." Leo answered before I could. "She is my family.
he said, pointing to me. And she is my family, he said, pointing to Chloe. The rest are relatives by chance. The decision is made. Mr. Albright sighed the sigh of a man who knew the battle was lost before it began. He stood. I've delivered the message. The rest is up to you. We showed him out. The look on his face told us he already knew the outcome. A few days later, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, the knock came. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a loud, confident rap, the kind used by people trying to project a friendliness they did not feel. Leo and I exchanged a look. "Showtime," he murmured. He opened the door, and there they were, the entire Winslow clan assembled on our modest doorstep like a delegation from a fallen kingdom. Beatrice was smiling a terrifying, stretched smile. Arthur was puffed up with indignation. Diana was wearing enough jewelry to fund a small school. And Isabella was dressed as if for a royal christening. And Beatrice was holding a pie, a homemade pie. It was the most terrifying sight I had ever seen. "Amelia, darling," Beatrice gushed, sweeping past Leo as if he were a doorman. "We just had to see you all. We've missed you so terribly." Her eyes scanned our living room, taking in its normal IKEA and love-filled existence with barely concealed disdain. They flooded in, a tide of expensive fabric and desperation. Diana immediately dabbed at dry eyes. "We were just saying how family is the most important thing."
Isabella stepped forward and recited, "I'm sorry." Then she added, with chilling candor, "Grandma said I wouldn't get the new tablet if I didn't." A truly heartfelt apology. Beatrice beamed, as if her granddaughter had just recited sonnets. "And we would love," she said, her voice saccharine, "for us to simply wipe the slate clean." Diana clasped her hands. "Let bygones be bygones." Arthur gave a tight, pained smile. "We're prepared to forgive and forget." So, there it was. Not an apology for their actions, but a magnanimous offer to forgive us for our reaction. "So," Beatrice said, her tone impossibly light, as if discussing the weather, "do you think you'll be able to resume your assistance with the company, now that we've sorted all this silliness out?" The mask was off. The pie was a bribe. The visit, a transaction. "We need a moment," Leo said, his voice neutral. We stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind us. The second it clicked shut, we looked at each other and said, in perfect, quiet unison, "No." It wasn't even a debate. We walked back in. Leo spoke. "The answer is no." The transformation was instantaneous and ugly. The saccharine sweetness curdled into pure venom. Beatrice's smile shattered. "What did you say?" she hissed. "I said no," Leo repeated. "We apologized," Diana shrieked, her voice losing all its faux refinement. "You owe us this," Arthur roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "We humbled ourselves to come here." Beatrice took a step forward, her eyes narrowed to slits. "After everything we've done for you, we took you in, we gave you our name, and you refuse to act like family?" Leo moved to stand in front of Chloe and me. "You treated my wife like a servant. You treated my daughter like she was an embarrassment. You didn't come here for us. You came here for our money. The answer is no. Now please leave." They stared at him aghast, as if he had sprouted a second head. "We'll cut you off," Arthur spat. "You'll get nothing." Leo actually laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Cut me off from what? Your debt? We're done." The silence that followed was profound. They realized, then, that we knew the full, hollow truth of their empire. We had seen the cracked foundation. "Get out," Leo said, his voice low and final. They left in a whirlwind of outrage and crumbling entitlement. The house felt quiet afterward, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the calm at the eye of the hurricane. We hadn't just said no. We had pushed the first domino. 6 months later, the last domino fell. Arthur and Beatrice Winslow declared bankruptcy. Not the kind you recover from, but the kind that strips you bare. They lost the mansion, the Nantucket cottage, the art collection Beatrice loved to show off. The courts seized what they could to repay creditors, including the substantial sum they had borrowed from me. Beatrice wept when the check was signed, not for the family she had broken, but for the objects she had lost. Isabella now attends public school. I hear she's miserable. No one is impressed by her last name there. Diana, the socialite, now works part-time at a high-end home goods store. She tells her remaining friends she's exploring her passion for interior design. And Arthur? The man who once told me I should be grateful for the crumbs from his table is now a low-level manager at a distribution center. He reports to a man young enough to be his son. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. As for us, Leo and I run our business together, and it's thriving. Chloe laughs freely now, a sound that fills our home with light. She wears whatever she wants, which is usually something bright, sparkly, and wonderfully, joyfully cheap. We have had no contact with the Winslows since that day on our doorstep, and that silence, finally, is not a threat. It's a blessing. It's the sound of freedom. So, I'll leave you with the question that keeps me up some nights. Not with guilt, but with a quiet sense of justice. When they threw my daughter's clothes away, did we go too far in our response? Or did we not go far enough?